All right, next presenters are Abigail Peterson, Director of Agronomy for the Illinois Soybean Association, and Dr. Stacy Zuber, ISA Research Data Scientist. And today they will introduce a new effort with ISA to develop an on-farm trial network to assess and evaluate challenging soybean production topics. They'll share more about how to get involved and the topics the on-farm trial network will aim to address. Really impressed over the last few years the association's commitment to research and learning more throughout the state about what goes on and how we can get better. So please join me in welcoming Abigail and Stacy.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, let's see if I can use this clicker. I want to extend another warm welcome to everyone here today. My team, the Illinois Soybean Association, couldn't be more thrilled to see you all engaging with us, supporting the efforts of your researchers, of the farmers here that are bridging together their research and education on their fields to help hopefully influence something that you can take away on your operation and moving forward. I will have the shortest speaking time in this whole scope of the program. Dr. Stacy Zuber will be covering a lot more of the trialing network efforts. My job is to introduce you to the agronomy team, what we do, and although I have the shortest speaking time, I couldn't be more enthusiastic about and wouldn't want to talk anything else but the team that we have here and the work that we do. And I won't even begin to cover it all. So hopefully taking away from this is you have an agronomy team at the Illinois Soybean Association that is on call, loves to go to fields, not sit in the office, and be there either annoying you, showing you something that you've probably never seen before, or trying something new, which I think Chris set us up very well for understanding how important it is to try new things and learn something, and making efforts to strive for a better year each year with each growing season. So to begin, we started this winter season, kicking off the year 2024 with our Better Bean events. I do want to touch base that we had wonderful speakers, wonderful farmer turnouts. If any of the farmers here attended any of those Better Beans, I also want to extend a thank you. I really appreciated the traveling that the speakers came in. Just to note, those are all of those breakouts, all those sessions are on lsoyadvisor.com. Those YouTubes are accessible for you to rewatch. You know, some of the highlights have been Dr. Sean Castile talking about sulfur and the foundations in soybean development. Dr. Jessica Rukowski from the University of Illinois touched base on wheat growth and double cropping at our Rend Lake meeting, which was really great at that facility. And she'll also be at the Double Crop Forum here in Mount Vernon coming up on February 5th. So more events to attend to see great speakers like Jessica. And then Megan Anderson, just a highlight from the recent one we had in Deer Grove, talked about winning against weeds and had a great, interesting talk on chemical incorporations into what type of systems you're using with manipulating active ingredients and rates and applications. That was really interesting to learn from. She came from Iowa State, and we love to engage with researchers all across the Midwest, taking the best experts that we can find and bringing them to you to learn from. So at ISA, we are a team. So I did want to touch base that we, as the agronomy team, are part of production, but there are also two other pillars, market development and government relations. And as I am biased to the production team being the best team, we also get to have the most fun of working with each of the departments because all of it comes from the field, the soybean. So when we're working with our market development team, focusing on soybean quality, opportunities within the market space to bring realistic opportunities onto your fields as far as premiums or specialty beans, anything in the scope of increasing protein, oil, quality, market development really strives towards advancing those efforts, and our mic runners today are on the market on the government relations team, sorry, but the market development team is here, and you'll see them in the trade space and encourage you to talk to them as well. Government relations, so our mic speakers, Matt and Colin are on the government relations team, as well as many of the other government relations team are here. Again, Within production, we have a lot of efforts that support the government relations team, and it is our job to ensure that the data generated by the ISA agronomy team is used to further government relations and market development efforts. As you know, in the space of climate, in the space of conservation, policy is very important to engage with. We want to engage with our government stakeholders and engage them with the ISA conservation and agronomy work, helping train retailers, specialists in the fields, boots on the ground efforts that we can provide non-biased agronomic information to those technical providers in the space of understanding how to adapt these systems in the field. And so from those two pillars, you are looking at the agronomy team within production, and we have a lot that we deal with across the board. I like the soil, I like the bugs and the grubs and working with diseases and things and all across the board, but ultimately our goal is just to create what is the best bean that we can grow in Illinois. You are all very good at growing beans in Illinois. You are #1 soybean producers in the U.S. You don't need to be necessarily told how to grow soybeans, but how can we grow them better, resilient, with more stability, more sustainability, increasing ROI, increasing legacy on the farm throughout generations, and how to find those little tweaks and challenges that Chris mentioned to push yourselves further. I do want to introduce you to the team. We've had quite the growth recently, and as we grow, we're making sure that we are keeping the ISA team as well-oiled machine as we can and lean, because as your checkoff, it is our job to expand your efforts and funds to the state of Illinois and the experts that we have in engaging with them as far as the University of Illinois, Extension, within NRCS, USDA, within the other organizations in the state like the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, the Illinois Fertilizer Chemical Association, CCAs, retailers, industry, all across the board. It is our job to reach all of those footprints as much as we can and bring them to the soybean farmers of Illinois. So starting with Dr. Stacy Zuber, you will hear from her and her background, a great addition to the team in the scope of soil science and the needs behind understanding agronomy metrics with soil applications, as you heard from Chris, understanding soil testing, different dynamics that influence nutrient uptake. All of these things are very important when we're talking about soil science, and Stacy's been a great addition. Jennifer Jones has been on our team now for going on 2 years. She is developed into our research specialist and has engaged across the board with not only the researchers that you'll hear speaking today. There is a brochure out in the other room Stacy will touch base on, but we've doubled the efforts of the research in the soybean production team and are excited for our new RFP season that will be coming around the corner for researchers to engage, that our board get to then have the fun of reading through the research and engaging to see, does this make sense for what we want, and go out and fund it. And it's every year we do an evaluation to make sure that we are approaching every challenge with the best step forward. Routinely looking at different projects and making sure that if we need to have additional funding for seasons as we go from corn, soybean, and wheat, and making sure research projects span a whole growing season in those efforts, or changing it up. If something doesn't work, we're going to change the project. And I think that was really eye-opening to me coming into the association, that we really had the power to make sure the efforts of every year, every project made sense. And Jennifer does a huge engagement with those researchers as well as the students in the state, which we have a huge investment in as well. We think the future of Illinois relies on the next generation of students coming through the doors, whether they come from an ag background or not, needing engineers, scientists, plant breeders, plant pathologists, anything across the board within agriculture. There's so many careers to engage with. We want to make sure students not only get the opportunities to find and engage what they like and see in agriculture, but also keep that talent in Illinois and keep them proud to be working within Illinois and Illinois farmers and engaging with the challenges that we have here. Deanna Burkhart, our producer and field services administrator. It was very important within starting the efforts within this team that when we were starting the on-farm trialing network, we had a very strong engagement from the get-go with our farmers and producers that are going to be in this program. As I have worked on programs in other organizations and have been able to see within the state what is available for programming, it's when it's lost in translation from the farmer's understanding of what we're doing to the actual program they're enrolled in that things start to crumble, and we start to see that those efforts are actually well spent, and the farmers aren't getting the value that they need. Deanna's job is to make sure that the farmers that engage with us are receiving the data that we are partnering with them with, that they are receiving valuable information, and that their feedback is heard. That was very important when starting this program, and it's very exciting to have Deanna on to also work with the field staff that we'll have, that will be working in your fields, doing GPS, spatial needs, things that fall into an agronomist's work that Deanna needs to help coordinate, soil sampling, tissue sampling, all across the board. So it was very important for us to keep Deanna making huge efforts in that space, as she has had a career background in industry within breeding and relationships with making sure efforts are continuing in the pipeline within industry breeding networks. Additional team members, Stephanie Porter, our outreach agronomist. If I cannot encourage you more to engage on our summer field events, to hear Stephanie cover a year in review or just where we are at in the season of what the crop looks like, is one of my favorite things to do during the summer. Stephanie has a huge network of agronomists in the state that she works with. Our Soy Envoy program that I hope you engage with if you are a agronomist sitting in the crowd, or even a farmer that wants to engage a student. The Soy Envoy program even lets her see more of the state than ever before, and seeing her being able to talk about what's happening in the field at the moment is worthwhile to know what to implement moving forward. If we can address any concerns, like Chris said, reducing stress before R1, making sure those beans are happy and healthy as long as we can to make sure they continue to a great harvest. Kelsey is the brain behind El Soy Advisor, the efforts and things that you see that come across through YouTube, that come across through our Twitter, our socials. One of the biggest things I saw coming into the association as an agronomist, I have worked after graduating from Iowa State in the countryside, is knowing what's going on. Do we know what our researchers are doing? Is it translating practically to you, practically to retailers, practically to non-farm operating landowners, which is sometimes the hardest audience to engage. And then also a breadth of others that also work within making decisions on the field, making sure everyone can comprehend and understand and get that information in a digestible way is a whole job. And Kelsey is doing an amazing job. Hopefully you've seen a lot more of the efforts through El Soy Advisor, video recordings of the researchers in the fields. I am not someone who likes to sit down and read a 5-page paper every night, but to see Andrew Margonaut actually sampling fields, telling me where those samples are going, how the process works with his students, and telling me what to expect for results at the end of the year, and then getting excited and geared up to see what his results will be, and engaging with him more at field days when I see him talk because I actually understand what he's doing. That's Kelsey's job. We want to translate the research to you in a way that makes sense. And the feedback that you provide from these events, any of the surveys that you get, we pay attention to. The negative, the positive, everything in between, we want to hear it. We do adjust what we do because you are our bosses. Connie Copley. So she is really a mastermind behind keeping us all together and the glue of the team. Anything that you see as far as resources, she knows where it's at. Anything that you see from the team that you might want to engage with but don't have someone's number, don't have someone's contact, she knows where we are. She's keeping us alive, and she's also making sure that the farmers, when they have questions and they come to our team, they're answered timely and they get the answers they need. Teachers, others who are out in the field that like pocket guidebooks, resources. We want to strive to give you the educational resources you need and not be hindered by any type of setbacks or red tape that you have to get through to get those resources. We want to be able to have those at your fingertips in the most updated format. So please engage with us. Connie keeps us going. And again, staff is here from all of the departments. You'll see us in green shirts, as well as other staff. Please talk with us, ask us what we do, tell us what you'd like to see changed, and what you have questions on, because that's our job, and we love these types of events to engage. So as part of the agronomy team, I'm going to start picking up my pace because I want Stacy to have her time. But for you to understand what we do on the ISA agronomy team is really the pillars of what our strategic plan is. So when we go into this RFP season, our call for proposals, and we're bucketing where this funding is geared towards, this is what we're working on. And so I hope this is something that you all relate to, as this is where we are putting the efforts in the state. Establishing basic and applied research priorities that address regionally specific production opportunities and challenges, as well as economic factors. One thing about making a strategic plan is you wordsmith the heck out of the sentences so it can address as much as you can to cover about everything that you want. So this covers a lot, and what we really work on in the field is engaging with what are the new things that you can do regionally specific to production. This is annual ryegrass in southern Illinois, obviously. We have great speakers here talking about cover crops, Jay Riddle, Jim Iserman, Dan Schaefer. When I am at a field day, when it is an ISA-led event, I have the people that I look up to talking, and they have been some of the greatest leaders in talking about the new advancements for cover crops and how to adapt these systems successfully. And so please engage with our speakers as they are here today, as they are who I am looking up to for information. And so engaging on new technologies, keeping that soybean plant healthy and happy, and making sure that regionally we're addressing specific factors, as you'll see, like something like RMA, when they increased crop planting dates for soybeans, the work from the Science for Success, which engaged checkoff funding to get efforts to make sure that you guys who plant very early was considered in the next round of increasing insurance cropping dates. That's what we work on. So the data that we collect from you as farmers is very helpful across the board of what we work on. And making sure those, like I said, those beans within crop development. We have Dr. Connor Sybil here and AJ Woodyard. I always love hearing them talk about how they see what are these key factors to advance soybeans in your field. That's all what we address. But you know, at the end of the day, what the real pest and problem is, it does come down a lot to the same thing that you all across the board talk about, and you might think I might say water hemp, but it's been deer. It's been deer has been the top priority at every single field day that we talk about, so when I say we listen, we listen. So as we work on every single pest, I love working with bean leaf beetles, stink bugs, Japanese beetles. We do know what's really eating those beans too and causing, wreaking havoc. So we do love to engage on all your issues in the field. Coming up next is to build partnerships with both public and private entities to augment ISA's agronomic research and educational programs. I hope you see ISA as a strength in Illinois to enhance what work we have going on. To engage with Dr. Giovanni, Dr. Andrew Margonaut, our new plant pathologist, Boris Kimaletti. They are all in the state working as hard as they can't be everywhere at once. It is our job to make sure that their information is being able to get to you, but also get them to you. Do the heavy work of organizing, keeping things going for a field day, and get them out to you. If they have educational efforts that they'd like to engage with you with as far as putting something on your field, like Dr. Nick Sider is here today going to talk about insects in the field. If he has something that he wants to do with seed treatment with insecticides and see real on-farm adaptations, not just from one place in Illinois, but scoped out throughout. You know, how do we get farmers to engage? We hope you see ISA as that hub to see more university research on your fields. This is my favorite piece of the strategic plan, and that is to demonstrate soybean agronomics focused on soil and water quality, agricultural resource resiliency, and land stewardship. When I started working with cover crops and soil health systems, I have had a very privileged career in the fact that I've never had to sell anything. I was never selling a cost share. I've never had to sell on behalf of an industry partner. My job when I first started, Jim Iserman as my mentor, was to just work with farmers on what it looked like. Did it work? Did it not work? I worked for the National Corn Growers on just going out to farmers' fields and asking them what they're doing. And luckily I was working with farmers that have been doing it for many, many years and taught me a lot of what not to do. And the one thing that is key in the driver that I've seen all through educational events and through my education is you kind of have to see it. You have to do it. Like Chris said, taking acres and experimenting for yourself, and hopefully you'll engage with Stacy on our trialing network and seeing that. That's what we want to do too. We want to see you engaged in the field. The pans that are pounded into the ground were from this season, so you can imagine it was pretty hard to get them going through, but those are neighboring fields of what no-till versus three-pass tillage corn looks like, and those we have as rainfall simulators, tabletop rainfall simulators, and looking at how those soil dynamics work. The middle slide is what soybean crop development looked like when we had cereal rye before beans in a dry year. Usually my highlight to most of my talks have been the 2019 season when it was so wet, and how to manage termination and planting strategies during a wet season. This was my first time with the dry season to really see how it adapted and seeing how it transitions. And so you learn something every year and every time you're out in the field, but it's our job to demonstrate, and it is one of my favorite pieces of our program. Now the last one is to continue to expand the ISA agronomic network. And that's where you play into this, and raise awareness and trust among farmers through ongoing outreach and research education. We want to provide Illinois universities with access to farmers to align research and farm priorities. We want to be in the field with industry leaders, government leaders, and university academic leaders to bridge everyone together to make sure we're providing the best advanced agronomic research there is. We are the #1 soybean state. We need to have the leading research, and we want to help strive towards that. Something that we focus on a lot of the team, and a lot of from the text that you've just read through, has been towards stewardship and resiliency, soil loss and water quality through the nutrient loss reduction strategy is something that you'll be hearing from us and other partners that we work with, and we hope you engage on the efforts towards the nutrient loss reduction strategy. Knowing that cover crops and soil health systems, I talk about those systems as strategies and tools. Like it was mentioned in Chris' talk, when my father and uncle farm when I went to college, and there wasn't room for me. So my job was to really graduate, and I got to work with better farmers to see how they did it, and then got to secretly just watch them the whole time and think through every growing season, what would I do if I was in charge? And I took pictures of all their mistakes, and I recorded everything that because they were obviously taking over from their retired father that was still talking about how to do things. And essentially, I always looked at systems out in the fields of, would this be something I would want to talk to my dad and uncle about? Because if I came to them to the table and said, hey, you should try cover crops, I better have a good first season. I cannot mess up. I would be off the farm forever, and they would never forget it. Just like I've never let them forget things. And so cover crops has always been a tough one to start to talk about, because it can have very conflicting either interest from farmers or just how it's approached. It's a complicated one, but for me, as walking fields, they are the most beautiful fields, and they are my most interesting fields as far as looking at if you want to see a change. A fungicide application can do that. Looking at planting dates can do that, but looking at a systems change and seeing beneficial insects, seeing weed control, seeing water infiltration, all of these in 1 year, that's even more exciting. And that's where I feel like if any farmer has walked a field with me, I'm usually stopping every 5 foot to take a photo because it's something that I just can't get over of how great it looks. This is one of Jay Riddle's fields, actually, that you'll hear from him. Again, cleanest looking fields. For me, this is a Putnam field south of us in Bureau County. I would say we have fields of better soil quality than this one, and I'm sure Jay does as well, but this one's a little bit more sandy and has a soil tilth that isn't like your flat black soil, but we have flat black soil in some areas, not a lot. But this field looked better, and this is the drought from this year. The beans were lush green, had no physical signs of turning over, wilting, or anything, had no stresses, and really that in-season weed control, where I feel like a lot of fields saw those weed escapes from the residual not taking on, cleanest fields that I could see. And a big piece of this is also the residue turnover. You can see here from planting to where it was mid-season, or just where those beans were not yet canopied, but then all the way to the end of up until harvest, where we're starting leaf drop there in that last photo. if you did a Transect survey and tried to tell me what kind of residue was out there, or if this was a tilled field, the rye residue was gone. So that's really a click for me when we talk about residue management in these systems. It is quite amazing what it can do for the soil benefits. Now, from Chris's talk, Stacy, I'm going fast. From Chris's talk, talking about what to do next on the farm, I would say this is my cousin and my dad who are now the decision makers on the farm, and they don't brainstorm. They don't have meetings. We don't host a family get-together and talk about what we're going to do next for great ideas. This is when decisions are made, when they're just standing around watching the bin unload, we were waiting for that wagon to get done to wrap up for the night, and that's when they talk about their great new ideas. And this is usually when they bring up cover crops in the middle of October. I'm like, we should have been talking about this way earlier, but somehow they get it done. But this is when they talk about the new next thing they want to do, and I think this is what some farm families do. I'm sure you are all much more organized in your planning efforts and making your list. But this is the most interesting time for me because this is when I just start dreaming of, is it something that we're going to do with the planter? And is it, we've talked about getting a bigger planter. This is when we talk about we should get a draper. This is when we should talk about we already got a bigger corn head. What's the next thing on equipment that we're going to do? This is when I start dreaming about an air seeder because we've used this really, really teeny tiny 15-foot old drill that they graciously let me do in the open air cab tractor in November. And had no planting precision or anything. It got the job done, but this is what I was dreaming about. I could get some real acres done with this air seeder. Looking at bigger drills, looking at things that you can get in right after that combine is done and out of the field and striving for better applications. And we don't have a sprayer. Is the next thing that we should do invest in a sprayer? Is that the economic best move? Is it the best move before we go to cover crops? Because if I had better control of the termination and when it was done, instead of relying on someone else, I should probably get a sprayer before I start adapting anything else. Strip-till bar. I love seeing strip-till bars. Strip-till bars and cover crops are one of my favorites. Strip-till before corn without a cover crop is definitely one of my favorites. And I dream about the strip-till bars. But we don't have one of those. And that's what we're doing. We're dreaming, we're planning. We usually talk about it for 3 years before we actually do anything. But that's what we do. And that's what I want to do on this team, is start to take what you're dreaming and what you're thinking of and being able to strategize, can you do it? And if it's something like an equipment adjustment, if it's equipment bringing something in, can we have something partnered where we can come in and split a field, or something where you can try one field out and really see a difference? And that's what I like to do too, is see the in-season development, see are we striving for what we're wanting to do is making it work, and if not, what is that factor? What is that question we should ask? So from the field, it also takes our outreach capabilities in looking into the soil, and Stacy will talk more about that. But one thing that I do when I'm not looking at pretty cover crop fields is looking at resource concerns and walking fields and saying, we can do something different here. This is something that is often too common in fields that I walk, it's something that when farmers walk their fields, we see it too, but when you have a state like Illinois where we have a lot of non-operating landowners and rented ground, this is the tough conversation to have, but it's definitely the resource concern that is starting to become for everyone. And so throughout the team, like I mentioned, we focus on disease, insect, nutrient management, any type of challenge you can think of, we want to be there for you in the field. And like I said, student engagement is our top priority as well. We love engaging with students. As you eat your meals, as you wander the hallways, you have the student poster session that we hope you take advantage of to read what those projects are about, to talk to the students, and hear from what they're learning. And at the end of the day, a lot of us on their team are from our own family farms. So we have a great investment into the next generation. This is when I'm talking about cover crops. I'm thinking about who's going to do this, who's the labor. We don't have another tractor to spare. What's that cost going to be on the other end? Beyond the soil health benefits, beyond the other things that we're seeing as far as what they can provide as far as agronomically, it takes a lot of steps between there, and it's a huge effort across the operation. And every season, I'm always so happy when it's planting, harvest, and really the whole summer, because we're all over the place, and we're working along with our families, but also with you in the field. And so, like I said, when you see us at field days, we'll probably be talking about our own fields, and it's always a pretty harvest on Peterson Farms, but once in a while, it is always fun to make fun of them, and to make sure that I can, when I'm far away from the farm, really say what I want to. With that, and Chris's talk, like he said, it's important to network, it's important to keep relationships, and that's what we want to do striving forward and moving forward, and I hope what you hear from Stacy is that next step for you.
All right, good morning, everyone. I am really excited to be here today to kind of talk to you about this new effort that Illinois Soybean Association is doing towards an on-farm trial network. But I wanted to start out with giving a little bit of my background. I grew up on a family farm in southeast Illinois, Richland County, if anyone's from that part of the state. My dad relatively recently retired from farming. He's still kind of involved with renting out his land, but it was always kind of a part of my life, having that background, growing up on the farm, seeing how farmers made the decisions they did, how complicated it was to make the decisions, because you're dealing with lots of things outside of your control. My background, I have a master's degree and a PhD from the University of Illinois here in Champaign, Urbana. I worked with crop science, I worked with soil health, with soil quality. That's my background. I have a lot of statistical background as well with that. But one of the things that I came away from that is actually understanding how much I don't know. There's so much more. The more I learned, the more I realized there's lots of unanswered questions, lots of unknowns, lots of complications, and lots of complexity in the world of agronomy and farming. And so, how do we deal with that? How do we work towards that? And that's kind of where I am right now in my career. I want to kind of see if we can figure out some of those answers. After I finished my graduate degrees, I ended up doing a couple of different postdoctoral research experiences. I went to the neighboring state of Indiana, and I worked at Purdue University for a few years, working on some on-farm research. There they were with the Conservation Cropping System Initiative in Indiana, if you're familiar with that. There were 14 different on-farm sites around the state, and so I got to work with some of the data from those on-farm research sites, some of the soil health data that came out of it. One of the pieces I learned from that, I came in at the later stages. They had been doing this research for a few years, and I got to work through all that data afterward. And how do we interpret that? How do we deal with it? And maybe what are the questions we should have been asking before we even got started? So that's really kind of driven me with this effort, with the On-Farm Trial Network, to make sure we're asking and answering all of those questions at the beginning instead of trying to figure it out at the end. After my experience in Indiana, I went the other side of Illinois and went over to the University of Missouri, where I also got to work on some soil health data from on-farm data, and again, kind of later stages of the process once that data had come in and how we dealt with that, how we interpreted it, and how we got that information back out to the farmers. I can tell you right now it's very difficult, it was very complicated, because everything with agronomic data is so complicated. After I got done with that postdoc, I decided world of academia wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. I wanted to move somewhere where I was working more directly with farmers. I was sharing the information and knowledge that I had learned. And so I got the opportunity to work with USDA and RCS. I was the state soil health specialist here in Illinois, and I did that for 3 years. I was very sad to leave, but I was very excited because of the opportunity that coming here to the Illinois Soybean Association was going to provide. And it's specifically because of this on-farm trial network. The opportunity to get to do research on the farm, to try to work on answering some of those questions that I got asked by farmers every time I went out and spoke to farm groups, to organizations, to field days about soil health. There was a lot of questions, well, how do I make this work? And I didn't have all the answers. We still don't have all the answers. So this is kind of an opportunity for me to try to find some of those answers, to get that information out to you. And so that's where we're going with this, where we're talking about it with on-farm research, with the on-farm trial network. So just to start out kind of the basics, why an on-farm trial network? We are already, as the Illinois Soybean Association, as Abigail mentioned, and you'll see if you go to the research breakout room later or even the graduate student poster session next door, we are already funding research around the state of Illinois. We are already funding some of that. So why do we need to focus on on-farm research? Well, it's kind of looking at what on-farm research really is. And it's research that's done on a working farm. It's using large enough plots that we can use the standard field equipment. It's making sure that we're being practical in the questions we're asking, as well as how we're doing that research. And just like any good research, we need to make sure to keep in mind, the scientific method, making sure we're considering the statistical analysis so we can get results that we can interpret, so we can start to detect the signal from the noise. That's the goal with this. Now, I would have liked to spend a whole hour talking about the statistics of this, but I was kind of given a hint that that might be a little boring for a group. So we won't get into too many details on that, but it is a thing, we have to make sure we're considering that, we're paying attention to how we're doing this research so we make sure we're doing it well. Because we want to use this research to try to answer questions, lots of questions. Any questions that farmers have that they're dealing with based on the concerns, the challenges that they're dealing with, even to the point of you've already tried a practice, is it working for you? Are there tweaks we can make to make it better? We're already implementing a practice, can we just test that and see how well it's working for us? And that can come back to the profitability, the return on investment. Can we make that better? Are we getting the biggest bang for our buck with these practices? And so the best way to do that sometimes is this on-farm research, because it's able to test these on a relatively small scale, but they're not the small plot, they're not the greenhouse site study, they're at field scale. They're just not over an entire farm or across the whole state. Until we can test it, can find out how well it works. And the ultimate goal of this, like any research, is to provide unbiased data that can be used to benefit others, to give recommendations, guidance, and make our farming systems in Illinois, which are already amazing, make them a little better, make them work better for us. So I've already mentioned this in a little bit, but how, on farm, why are we doing that, focusing on that, in addition to the more traditional research that we're doing? So traditional research, the goal of that, whether that's in a small plots, even in greenhouse, it's to minimize the variation, to try to keep everything as consistent as possible so that when you are going out there and collecting that data and doing the statistical analysis on it and telling farmers I found significant differences, that you are finding the actual signal. You are finding a difference between these treatments, and you're avoiding that noise. There is a lot of noise in these systems. There's huge amounts of variability, and it can be really difficult, like I said, to interpret. So those small plot research, that's why it's set up that way. But that means it may not be quite as applicable to your farms, to your soils, to your fields. And so that's where on-farm research comes in. It can give you more applicable results. It can maybe take results from a small plot research and try it out at field scale and make sure it actually works the way we expect it to. It's to test those things. So to test it in those real world environments, test it with the actual equipment that farmers are using, and be able to assess that at a larger scale, regional scale, local scale, expand that beyond just a few university research sites or a few fields that we're starting with in that initial, very well done research, but we want to expand it to the real world. So where does the Illinois Soybean Association fit into this? You know, as Abigail already mentioned, we are the #1 soybean producing state in the United States. So shouldn't we be a leader in the research that we're doing in the Midwest and even in the world? So that's our goal with this, is being able to get to that we are the leader in this. So our objectives, you know, we want to maximize the resilience of our systems. We want to minimize the risks that farmers are taking. We know that some of these conservation practices involve risk. There's complications, they're not easy to do. How can we find the answers or the best solutions that we can to minimize those risks and share that information back out to all of the farmers in the state to make it a little easier to make those decisions, make it a little easier to adopt cover crops or use no-till, or even how to make strip-till work better for you. And with all of that comes the idea of optimizing profit. Regardless of what practices you're choosing, we want to make sure that profit for farmers in the state is the #1. We want to make sure you're getting that return on investment for practices you're using. We want to make sure that these things are really worth your time and money and energy. So, like we've already mentioned, we are already funding agronomy research, and all of that agronomy research is really focused with the practical approach. We're trying to make sure that the questions we're asking and the answers that we're able to get out of that are useful to farmers. We want to take those problems, those challenges, those concerns, and identify the solutions as much as possible. So we have 16 funded research projects in the 3 main categories of pest management, conservation practices, and in-season agronomy. This is the brochure that got mentioned earlier. They are available at our table out near the trade show where you can pick these up. You can also get much more information at these in the research breakout session that's going to be this afternoon. I just have a few highlights of some of the projects that we are funding. We have things about cover crop planting date. This is from Nathan Johanning with University of Illinois Extension, really trying to identify what cover crops work best, what's the timing, what's the termination. A lot of the questions that farmers were asking me at those soil health days. So we are working on some of this research already. We have the insects pests from Dr. Nick Sider that got mentioned earlier. We have things about herbicide resistance and water hemp that Dr. Aaron Hager is working on. Here's a newer project from Dr. Andrew Marginot on trying to identify better recommendations for the liming in Illinois. Do we need to adjust what is in the Illinois Agronomy Handbook? Can we make it better? This is kind of a joint funded project with a lot of Illinois ag organizations that we are all kind of contributing toward this. But this is some of the types of questions and projects that we are already addressing. So there's also research coming in from other sources. Industry research, there's lots of it being done. There's lots of very good information coming out of that. But the downside of industry research is there's always going to be a little bit of bias in there, or a lot, depending. It's non-independent, and it can be very biased. So our goal is to be able to kind of fill in the gaps that's between the university research and the industry research. It's an opportunity to be that bridge between farmers and these other sources to maybe answer some other questions that the university research isn't getting to be able to react quickly when we have concerns, when farmers have questions and challenges that they're dealing with. How can we get to that? How can we find those answers and get them back out to you as soon as possible? And ultimately, we want to focus on practical and realistic guidance, and we want to use real-world sites. So I think these are the things that I keep focusing on this. We want to make sure that we are being practical, we are being realistic, because there's a lot of good research out there and a lot of good information that comes out, but it's not always something that you can implement on your farm. It's not always in a format that works for farmers, and it's not always answering the questions that you want to know the answers to. So our goal is to get to that, to get into that piece and that gap that we are seeing in the world, in Illinois. So ultimately, with this, how are we actually able to help Illinois farmers? How are we able to get this information back out to you, and what kind of things are we addressing? So this has already been mentioned, the nutrient loss reduction strategy. This is a huge push in Illinois, and honestly across the Midwest. Some of this is a requirement for us that we have to address nutrient loss. We need to eventually get to that 45% reduction of total nitrogen and phosphorus in the water that's coming out of Illinois. So what does that mean for farmers in Illinois? What does that mean for you? Well, there's a pressure for you to adopt practices that reduce losses. Using no-till, using reduced tillage, using cover crops. And as a soil health person, I would love to say every single one of you should put that on your fields right now. But realistically, that's not going to happen. But if we can find the answers to the questions of how can we make this work better for you, how can we minimize those risks, how can we make sure that this works, and how can we speed up how quickly it does work? Those are some of the things we want to address. We want to make sure we're getting those pieces, because we have, on top of the nutrients leaving our fields, we have losses of soil. This statistics kind of blew my mind a little bit. This is from 2017. It hasn't been updated since then, but this is from the Natural Resource Inventory, the national one from the USDA. And it has, looks at each state based on different characteristics and weather and things like that. How much soil have they lost from erosion in a year? So 101.5 million tons of soil left Illinois fields in 1 year. That's a massive number. So how can we make it easier for farmers to adopt these practices? How can we make these practices work better for them? So our goals, use this on-farm research to address the challenges that there are with these practices. There is a yield drag. We need to acknowledge that this is true. When you switch to no-till, your yields can suffer, at least for the first couple years. How can we speed that up? How can we speed up that transition, make that soil work better for you faster? What can we do? So if we can do this on-farm research to try that out, to try out different things, to see how quickly we can speed up that transition. Looking at the economics of it. Maybe you are not getting quite as much yield, but if your inputs are going down, does that make it okay? Are you willing to take that loss on yield if you're still making plenty of profit? And how can we maximize that? How can we get a higher return on investment? Ultimately, we want to optimize the entire system. And sometimes that means, from an Illinois Soybean Association person, telling you, yeah, it's probably not the best idea to put soybeans, to grow double crop soybeans. Maybe it's a better idea for you to use a small annual cover crop or a summer annual cover crop. Maybe that's the better thing for your system. And be prepared to use the science to give you the best guidance and information we can so we do get that entire system working the best for you. And again, minimizing risk, maximizing resilience, and optimizing profit. So we talked a lot about why. Now we want to talk about what it looks like. And I would love to tell you that I have every little detail all figured out to show you, but I don't. This is a process that we're working through. And, as Chris mentioned, you kind of need to start small sometimes. And we want to make sure that we're asking and answering as many of the questions so we make sure we get this right from the start so we're not wasting time and money. We want to make sure these are the right things to do. So to start out, we have these 3 different types of trials that we are planning to do with the On-Farm Trial Network. Various levels of intensity, of effort from farmers who want to participate in this. We have demonstration trials, action trials, and legacy trials. Those are going to be the 3 main components of our On-Farm Trial Network. So demonstration trials, just like we're talking, it sounds, we're trying to demonstrate practices. So these are going to be the least intensive from the farmer. We're not planning to do replicated strips in there. This is purely observational. We may do some, tissue testing or soil sampling things to get numbers out of here, but we're not planning to use this to do statistical analysis. But the goal of this is to be able to test things out and see if it's worth doing more work into, or maybe it's just to show farmers at field days, this is how it worked for me. This is how it worked on these soils. So the point of these is to be flexible. They will be a little less rigorous from a statistical analysis, but that means it's a little easier for farmers to do. We're going to plan to do this with either split fields or even just check strips in a field using a practice. So this could be really small, just a small acreage in a field, or it could be taking up the entire field if we do a split field. Action trials. These are, again, flexible. We want to be able to respond to issues that come up, to questions, concerns that farmers have, that we can change these from year to year. These will be relatively short term, just a few years likely for most of these. But the goal with these is to be able to get actionable guidance and recommendations to you to fit your operational needs. So we can do these on a smaller scale. Maybe there's an issue that comes up only in Southern Illinois or Northwest Illinois, and we can do trials in those areas. These will be replicated, 3 to 4 replications in a field. We will do control, some sort of control versus treatment. So they will be more complicated, but again, relatively short term. We want to be able to get out there and address these questions, these concerns as quickly as we can to get that actionable results, to get those back out to farmers as quickly as we can, so we are answering the questions as quickly as we can. And then the last of ours are the legacy trials. These will be long-term strip trials. We already have a few of these that are in place that we are hoping to build from, but focusing on those conservation practices like cover crops and no tillage and even strip tillage, focusing on the soil health. These, when we're looking at the soil as a soil scientist, it takes a long time to see those changes in the soil, so we need to make sure that we are having trials that are set up and in place long enough to see those differences. So these will be more of a long term. They will probably be the most intensive of our trials that we have because they will be in place and again replicated and with different treatments and control and treatments in place. So with all of these different kinds of trials, we really want to have farmers involved in these. We want to make sure we're covering the entire state. We want people from the north to the south. We want to make sure we're getting answering questions and getting information back out over the entire state. So we are planning to ramp this up throughout this year, hopefully to start putting more of these in place this fall. So we are looking for farmers who want to participate. We're also looking for ideas for what kind of topics should we attack first. What are the concerns that farmers have, and how can we ask the right questions to address those as soon as possible? So the best way for you to get this back to us on both counts, both the questions, concerns, and if you want to participate, is to fill out the Soybean Production Concern Survey. So I have the QR code up on the screen. There is also in front of each of you at your tables, there is a postcard in front of you. If you see the green and blue postcard that has a QR code on the front, the side that's up right now, that is also the Soybean Production Concern Survey. So we have questions in there about what kind of topics you have issues with, what are suggestions that you have. We also have on here an opportunity for you to sign up to participate in the on-farm trial network. And right now, we're just collecting information about who is interested, and we will follow up once we have more ideas about the specific types of trials we're going to do to determine if you are that right fit. But if you're interested, please sign up on that. We want to make sure that we are covering the entire state. We want to make sure we're getting plenty of farmers who want to participate. And, again, you don't have to be automatically in on that legacy trial. If all you want to do is a demonstration trial, we're happy to work with you. We just want to make sure we're getting good locations and good farmers to participate. If you are interested in helping us build this, getting these recommendations out, getting this guidance, and if you have the time, the energy, and there's always going to be a little bit of patience involved in this, particularly if you have some of the precision technology that makes on-farm trials so much easier to do. I'm not going to say easier, a little simpler in some ways to do, can streamline a few things. And we, again, like I said, we want to make sure we're covering the entire state. And for those of you who may not want to fill out the digital version of this survey on your phone, or if you take it home and want to do it on your laptop, there is a paper copy of this survey that you can fill out. It is at the table across from the registration desk out in the hallway if you're interested in that. So that is what I have for today. I'm just really looking forward to being able to come back and speak in these type of things at field days, at this type of event in the future, and have a lot more actual data and guidance and recommendations that we've been able to gain from our on-farm trial network in the future. So thank you. And I do believe we have time for questions.
You doing a breakout session?
I am not doing a breakout session. Jennifer Jones will be doing one on the research, but I will be in the graduate student research session next door if anyone would like to ask questions there.
We have one in the back, the microphone's headed that way. All right.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm wondering if any of this on-farm research will have the opportunity to integrate with NRCS's best practices for conservation on farm. As a former NRCS employee, you could possibly speak to the partnership that often happens between innovative practices by producers and researchers and how that inevitably gets adopted as part of the conservation standards.
Right, so I was, a part of NRCS. I've seen how in Illinois those standards are evaluated and updated based on the data that we have. So that is obviously a goal of this, is to be able to maybe test out some different new versions of some of these practices so we can, find the best way to do them and be able to bring that data back to NRCS in Illinois, that we can show them this, here's the statistics behind it, here's the interpretation, and this is the reason why we should, maybe adjust that standard to make it work better for the farmers and that kind of thing. And that is absolutely a goal. That was part of why I thought that this was a good move for me career-wise, is so that I could go somewhere to do this research to feed that back into NRCS and make it work better for farmers across the state.
So this is a little bit of a statistics question. For years, we've done like split trials, like we'll split a planter and compare two hybrids, or we'll do sprayer passes and we'll leave check strips. And so we compare the average of this, and we think, hey, there's an advantage here. But I got into a project this fall where I started doing confidence intervals, and it got me thinking then about all the other field trials where we're just looking at averages. In your experience, is it common that the farmer thinks they have a significant advantage, and then you actually do the standard deviation analysis and find out, no, this is just background noise? Because it makes me question some of what we've been doing without the proper analysis and think, well, just because climate or John Deere or whatever I'm going in circling my box says there's this average is higher than this average, maybe I can't see what that variation is, because a lot of times those easy to use tools don't tell you the standard deviation, they only tell you the mean of that area. So I was curious if that's a common thing you've run into when you run the analysis.
Yes, so ultimately, I guess this gets back to a statistical lesson that I wasn't planning to do, but ultimately when we're doing statistics and we are determining whether we have a significant difference or not, it ultimately comes back to, is the difference between the averages big enough to account for the variation that's in that data? So if we have a lot of variability across our fields, if we are getting very different numbers in there, and so we have a lot of differences in the measurement of, say, soil organic matter, in the differences in, say, the yield across a field, or in the different plots, if there's enough variability between those, when we put that average together, and so if we have differences that are, say, 5 bushels, if we're going with yield, across our different plots across a field, but the average, the two averages are only different by, say, 6 bushels, does that really mean that 6 bushels is real, or is that just a product of the variability across the field? So yes, that's absolutely an issue, and so that's why we want to make sure with at least our action trials and legacy trials, we have those replications so we can analyze them in a way that allows us to look at both the variation in the field and the real differences to say, is this a real difference that we would expect to see again, or is this just a product of the variation that we have? It is certainly a complication in doing on-farm research and any kind of agronomic research.
All right. Want to stay on time? Stacy, thank you very much.
Thank you.